fair to ask why Sidney Blumenthal had unfettered access to you, Madam Secretary, with whatever he wanted to talk about, and there's not a single solitary email to or from you to or from Ambassador Stevens. I think that is fair, and we'll take that up.
Gentlemen yield. Gentlemen yield.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you've made several inaccurate statements over the past month as you have tried to defend against multiple Republican admissions that the Select Committee has been wasting millions of tax dollars to damage Secretary Clinton's bid for president. On Sunday, you made another inaccurate statement during your appearance on Face the Nation, and it's being taken up here, and this is the relevance. Here's what you said, and I quote, "There are other folks who may have equities in her emails, and there may be other entities who are evaluating her emails. But my interest in them is solely making sure that I get everything I'm entitled to so that I can do my job. The rest of it, classification, Clinton Foundation, you name it, I have zero interest in it, which is why you haven't seen me send a subpoena related to it or interview a single person other than Brian Pagliano, because I need to know that the record is complete." And I'm going back to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I'm waiting.
Chairman,
I'm waiting on you. I've been very patient.
Coming. Just wait.
I'm waiting on the inaccurate statement.
I'm getting there. Mr. Chairman.
Well, we got to take a break.
Well, it's not going to take long. You took up 4 minutes over, so let me have 3.
I've let everybody go over, including you, Mr. Congress.
Thank you very much. You issued a subpoena to Sidney Blumenthal on May 19th, 2015, compelling him to appear for a deposition on June 16, 2015. You issued this subpoena unilaterally without giving the Select Committee members the opportunity to debate or vote on it. You sent 2 armed marshals to serve the subpoena on Mrs. Blumenthal's wife at their home without having ever sent him a request to participate voluntarily, which he would have done. Then, Mr. Chairman, you personally attended Mr. Blumenthal's deposition. You personally asked him about the Clinton Foundation, and you personally directed your staff to ask questions about the Clinton Foundation, which they did more than 50 times. Now, these facts directly contradict the statements you made on national television this last Sunday.
No, sir. With all due respect, they do not. We just heard email after email after email about Libya and Benghazi that Sidney Blumenthal sent to the Secretary of State. I don't care if he sent it by Morse code, carrier pigeon, smoke signals. The fact that he happened to send it by email is irrelevant. What is relevant is that he was sending information to the Secretary of State. That is what's relevant. Now, with respect to the subpoena, if he'd bothered to answer the telephone calls of our committee, he wouldn't have needed a subpoena.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll be happy to, but you need to make sure the entire record is correct, Mr. Congress.
And that's exactly what I want to do.
Well, then go ahead.
I'm about to tell you. I move that we put into the record the entire transcript of Sidney Blumenthal. We're going to release the emails. Let's do the transcript. That way the world can see it.
Well, we didn't.
Motion has been seconded.
Well, we're not going to take that up at a hearing. We'll take that up in a business
I've consulted with the parliamentarian, and they have informed us that we have a right to a recorded vote on that motion. We want, you
I'll tell you what, let's do that.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth. Well, that's what we want to have. Let the world see it.
Why is it that you only want Mr. Blumenthal's transcript released? Why don't you want the survivors?
All of them released.
The survivors, even their names?
Let me tell you something. No,
you want that released?
Let me tell you something. Right now,
the only one you've asked for is Sidney Blumenthal. That's the only one you've asked for. That and Miss Mills.
Cheryl Mills.
That's not true.
No, that's 2 out of 54. Now, if you want to ask for some fact witnesses,
we asked for a recorded vote on the Blumenthal. You said from the beginning we want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Why don't we just put the entire transcript out there and let the world see it? What do you have to hide?
These are the only emails that you have released. And the fairness to Mr. Blumenthal and to the American people, in the interest of a complete record, if you're going to release his emails, release his transcript where he has a chance to give the context of those emails.
Well, you keep referring to Blumenthal emails. I would hasten to remind both of you, the only reason we have Blumenthal emails is because he emailed the Secretary of State. Those are her emails. That's why they were released. They're not Blumenthal's emails, and she wanted all of her emails released. She's been saying since March, I want the entire world to see my emails. Well, Sidney Blumenthal's emails are part of that. So here's what I'll do. I'll be happy to talk to the parliamentarian, because the parliamentarian told me that your motion actually would not be in order for a hearing. But at the latest, we'll take a vote. And the first week we are back, after this week, we'll have a business meeting. We can take up Mr. Blumenthal's transcript. We can take up whatever other transcripts you want. And while we're there, we can also take up the 20-some-odd outstanding discovery requests that we have to different executive branch entities. Why don't we just take all of it up then?
Mr. Chairman, the allegations that have been made against him are refuted by his own testimony. In the interest of not having...
That's your opinion, Adam.
Well, if you disagree, then release the transcripts.
What allegation, Adam?
Why conceal the transcripts, even if the motion were not in order? You have the power to release them. You have the power
I'll tell you why, because I'm not going to release one transcript of someone who knows nothing about Libya by his own admission, while people who risk their lives, you have no interest in their story getting out. You don't want the 18 DS agents. You don't want the CIA agents. The only transcripts you want released are Miss Mills and Sidney Blumenthal.
Mr. Chairman,
so we'll take all of this up in November.
The only person you were interested in asking about during your entire questioning was Sidney Blumenthal. If you're so interested in him, release the transcript. You selectively released his emails. They're the only witness you've done that for. So you're asking, why are we only asking for his transcript?
I'm going to ask the gentleman from California to please do a better job of characterizing. These are not Sidney Blumenthal's emails. These are Secretary Clinton's emails. And I'll tell you what, if you think you've heard about Sidney Blumenthal so far, wait till the next round.
Sure.
With that, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, for almost a year, there was an escalating pattern of violence directed towards the United States and other Western targets in Libya. Attacks on the consulate in Benghazi, attacks and assassination attempts on the British ambassador, attacks on the International Red Cross, attacks on courthouses, judges assassinated, culminating on September the 11th, and the murder of 4 Americans, including our ambassador to Libya. Before those 4 murders, Mr. Chairman, just a few weeks before that, our embassy in Libya said this to the Department of State: the security condition in Libya remains unpredictable, volatile, and violent. So, Mr. Chairman, despite what would appear to any reasonably objective observer as an escalating pattern of violence, including sophistication, coordination, and management, this administration blamed the murder of our ambassador and 3 others on a video. Don't take my word for it, Mr. Chairman. Let's look at what Ambassador Rice herself said. Our current assessment is that what happened in Benghazi was, quote, in fact, initially a spontaneous reaction. I don't know what the phrase in fact means in diplomatic legalese. I can tell you what it means in a courtroom, Mr. Chairman. It means it's a fact. And she went on national television and she said, not as this ambassador has said, that I'm not going to speculate, that I've got to get all the information. She said, in fact, this was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired hours before in Cairo, almost a copycat of the demonstrations against our facility in Cairo, which were prompted, of course, Mr. Chairman, by a video, is what she said. And then she proceeds to say the attack was spontaneous. I can think of few things, Mr. Chairman, more antithetical to spontaneity than a 12-month-long prologue of violence in Libya. And then she said she relied solely and squarely on the information the intelligence community provided. Mr. Chairman, I would like to have another hearing where we can ask Ambassador Rice under oath, who told you what when? You're going to blame the intelligence committee? You come before this committee and you tell us who told you it was a video. Who in the intelligence community said it? Who in the diplomatic community blamed this on a video? And then we move to Jay Carney, who's the spokesperson for the leader of the free world. This is what he said, Mr. Chairman. I'm saying based on information that our initial information that includes all information, we saw no evidence to back up claims by others that this was a pre-planned or premeditated attack. What we saw was evidence that it was sparked by the reaction to this video. And that is what we know thus far based on evidence, concrete evidence, close quote. Mr. Chairman, you know that in former life, I spent a little time in the courtroom. So when I hear the phrase concrete evidence, it means something to me. That's even stronger language than simply saying something is in fact. So 2 representatives of this administration gave demonstrably false statements, not just to us, but to our fellow citizens on national television. Now, is the explanation for those demonstrably false statements, as my colleague from Florida just asked, was it negligence? Was it just a reckless disregard for the truth? Or was it more nefarious than that? Mr. Chairman, the American people are reasonable. People understand investigations take time. People don't expect you to speculate until you have all the facts. What they will not forgive, Mr. Chairman, is being misled. We want our questions answered, and I want them answered by the people that went out before the American people and sought to mislead them by blaming this on a video when there is no evidence, concrete or otherwise, to support the assertions made by this administration. Mr. Chairman, I just had a conversation with Jason Chaffetz out back, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. He still gets emotional talking about what he saw in Libya. There were 4 brave Americans who died under circumstances that we can scarcely fathom. The terror, the fear, the anarchy of being killed in that fashion. They did what their country asked them to do. They stood post under dangerous circumstances even after requests for security were denied. They stood their post. The least we can do is stand this meager post that we've been assigned and demand that this administration speak the truth to the people it's supposed to serve. This was never about a video. It was never spontaneous. This is terror. And I want to know why we were lied to. And I yield back. Mr. Reeder, were you aware of an allegation of inappropriate and unwanted sexual discussion at an EPA happy hour on December the 4th, 2013 at a restaurant? Were you aware of that? You know why you weren't aware of that?
Sorry. No, sir.
You know why you weren't aware of that, Mr. Reeder?
I don't know why.
Because you didn't bother to ask Mr. Jutro's supervisor when you during his background check. He knew about it. But you didn't bother to ask him. How about on July 29th, the same female was again the victim of inappropriate and unwanted sexual discussion by Mr. Jutro at the White House Innovation for Disaster Response and Recovery Day. Do you know about that?
I do not know.
You know why you didn't know about that, Mr. Reeder?
No, sir.
Because you didn't bother to ask the person who did know, which was the immediate supervisor of Mr. Jutro, while you were vetting him for another position. Did you know about an inappropriate and unwanted hugging and kissing that began with one of the victims in 2007?
No, sir.
You know why you didn't know about that, Mr. Reeder?
It wasn't told to me.
Because you didn't bother to, no. You weren't told, you didn't ask. You didn't interview his immediate supervisor. And do you recall what your rationale was for not interviewing that immediate supervisor?
Yes, sir.
What was that?
At some point before Dr. Jutro was put into the position,
I'm looking for an answer. I'm not looking for an encyclopedia. What reason did you give for not interviewing the immediate supervisor of the person that we're describing?
Congressman.
You want me to refresh your recollection, Mr. Reeder?
I think if the...
Because you don't talk to people at that level. That was your response.
That's the characterization of somebody else, sir. That's not my characterization.
It's the characterization of the Inspector General, Mr. Reeder.
So if you would like, I can explain.
No, I'm going to get through first, Mr. Reeder.
Yes, sir.
Were you aware of an allegation of inappropriate and unwanted hugging and kissing that occurred at another White House meeting in approximately 2009, 2010?
No, sir.
Do you know why you weren't aware of that, Mr. Reeder?
No, sir.
Because you didn't bother to ask the person that had knowledge, which would have been the immediate supervisor of the person you were vetting for another office. Were you aware of inappropriate and unwanted hugging and kissing and sexual discussion that began with yet another victim in 2002?
No, sir.
You know why you weren't aware of that, Mr. Reeder?
Congressman,
Because you didn't bother to ask the person who knew.
I would.
Did you volunteer the information when you were asked?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what information you're referring to.
Did you know any of these allegations, Mr. Reeder?
No, sir.
Why did you not interview? Well, let me ask the Inspector General. Do you agree with that, Mr. Inspector General, that Mr. Reeder was not aware of any allegations of wrongdoing at the time that you interviewed him and failed to volunteer it?
Let me defer to Mr. Sullivan, who has the facts on the investigative piece.
Mr. Gowdy, we determined that at a minimum, Mr. Reeder was aware of the offensive discussion that Mr. Utro had with Ms. Felt. He was also aware of the reporting of Mr. Utro's sexual harassment, including unwanted hugging and kissing with a senior executive. And Ms. Felt reported that to Mr. Reeder, as well as other senior people, including the former Deputy Administrator, Mr. Perciasepi, before Mr. Utro was appointed as the Acting Associate Administrator.
And what did Mr. Reeder do with that information?
I don't know what he did, but we didn't find out about it.
But he was on notice before the promotion was made of some of these allegations.
Yes, that
and
is.
Would have been on notice of
Correct.
more had he bothered to ask the immediate supervisor.
Well, had he asked the immediate supervisor, we had interviewed the immediate supervisor. That supervisor told us I would have absolutely shared that with Mr. Reeder, but he was never contacted.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Holder, Assistant Attorney General Ronald Weitz wrote a letter to a member of Congress, February 2011, a letter which was demonstrably false. Your department withdrew that letter 10 months later. When did you learn that that letter was false?
Well, I would not characterize the letter as false. I'd say it contained inaccuracies.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, it contained material, demonstrably false statements. Agreed?
No.
You don't think they're demonstrably false when you represent that ATF makes an effort to interdict all weapons going to Mexico? You don't think that's demonstrably false?
Not in the way you use the word. You said...
Well, how do you know what way I use the word?
I'm listening to you.
Is it false? Can I demonstrate that it's false?
Well, you said materially false. Now, you're using legal terms there. You're a lawyer, and so you're now we're in that realm. And you said materially false, and that's a fundamentally different thing.
All right. Do you think it was demonstrably false?
I would say that it was inaccurate.
All right. When did you learn that it was inaccurate, demonstrably false?
You know, I'm not sure, but I had concerns about it early enough that in spite of the expression on February 4th, I ordered that investigation on February the 28th, and as it was an evolving process. As time went on, more and more information became available, and it became more and more clear that that letter contained inaccurate information.
Well, it strikes me that if a statement that false were made to a judge, you would have withdrawn that statement, that brief, that memo, that filing the moment that you learned it was false.
Well,
and I'm just curious why there's not the same regard for this branch of government that there would be for the judicial branch of government.
Well, if you look at what happened over the course of months between the time of the letter until it was formally withdrawn, there were a number of instances where we indicated that we had concerns about what was in the letter. In testimony that Mr. Weitz gave, at one point I believe he says we are not, I don't remember exact expression that he used, but he indicated there that we had concerns. In a letter that I sent, I guess in October, I indicated there were problems with Fast and Furious, which was inconsistent with what the letter said. There are a number of things that happened between February 4th and I guess December, November, whenever it is that we actually...
Well, let's go back to February 4th, because there are at least 4 senior DOJ officials who knew or should have known that letter was false at the time it was delivered. Your Chief of Staff, Gary Grindler, saw a map of Mexico where guns were being recovered. He was debriefed on Fast and Furious. He knew that cash was being paid for the weapons in Arizona. Lanny Brewer, you will concede, knew for a fact that gun walking was taking place in February of 2011. Agreed?
No.
You disagree that Lanny Brewer, despite the fact that he's admitted it, knew that gun walking was taking place by ATF. Mr. Attorney General, there are emails where he admitted it in October of 2010.
Hey, now, Congressman, you have to be careful here. He said that he knew about gun walking in Operation Wide Receiver.
Right, which is why it's very important. Mr. White didn't say Fast and Furious in his letter to Senator Grassley. I see where you're going with that. He didn't make a distinction on Fast and Furious.
I'm just trying to be careful here.
And I want to be careful, too.
You don't want to conflate things.
I'm not conflating.
Okay.
Did Lanny Brewer know that ATF engaged in gun walking in February of 2011?
He knew that they had engaged in gun walking in the wide receiver operation.
So the answer to that question would be yes. Lanny Brewer knew that any statement that ATF makes every effort to interdict guns and not allow them to go to Mexico, he knew that statement would have been false.
Well, he has said that he made a mistake in not connecting that which he knew about wide receiver and didn't apply that knowledge to what happened in Fast.
What about Jason Weinstein and James Trusty? This is their email exchange. It's a tricky case given the number of guns that have walked. That's October 2010. Trusty responds, it's not going to be any surprise that a bunch of U.S. guns are being used in Mexico, so I'm not sure how much grief we get for gun walking. These aren't AUSAs in Arizona. These aren't rogue ATF agents. These are senior DOJ officials, and I cannot believe that they just learned recently that a demonstrably false letter had been mailed to a member of Congress. Why not correct it the moment you realized that it was wrong?
Well, they admit that they made mistakes with regard to what their level of knowledge was and what they should have done in the preparation of the letter. They relied on people who they thought had the best knowledge in Arizona and did not bring into their calculation information that they had previously had about the gun walking that had occurred in that prior operation.
Mr. Attorney General, you brought several law enforcement officials with you today, and I salute their service. It just strikes me, and I'm quite confident I'll get this question when I go back home. When law enforcement officers lie to lawyers, they go to jail. When lawyers lie to Congress, they seem to get promoted. There's a Border Patrol agent who is on his way to federal prison right now on a 1001 conviction. What consequences can we expect because of false statements made to Congress?
The gentleman's time has expired, and if the Attorney General will respond to the question.
Well, as I said, there is an Inspector General investigation that is underway. I'll look at the results of that investigation, but I'll also be looking to see what happened with regard to the creation of that letter, if there's any more information that I can glean on my own before making determinations as to how people will be held accountable for the mistakes that they made. And taking into account in making that determination, what roles have they played in the department? What good things have they done? I mean, one cannot look at these mistakes, I think, in isolation. One has to look at the totality of the person's service to the department, and then on that basis make a determination as to what the appropriate sanction will be, and that's what I'll do. Mr.
Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent for 15 seconds just so I can follow up on one point.
And gentleman continues to be recognized for 15 seconds.
Mr. Attorney General, it just seems to me that the policy is now going to be, let's get the least knowledgeable person that we can to write the letter. I found the exchange between you and Chairman Sensenbrenner to be interesting on mens rea. The defense is that Mr. White didn't know what he didn't know, so we're going to get the least knowledgeable person in the Department of Justice to write the letters to members of Congress. Is that what we can expect from now on?
No, what you could expect from this Department of Justice, as long as I'm the Attorney General, is that we will do our best to get you accurate information as quickly as we can. And I actually think that one of the problems with regard to the Fast and Furious response is that we were rushed. That people, although if you look at that email, all those emails that we sent around, you see that people are really interacting with one another, trying to find information, but I think there was a time pressure there that frankly they should not have allowed in the process. They should have taken more time, sent a placeholder response or something like that, and if it took 2 weeks to get a response back to Congress, that would have been better than I think the 4 or 5 days that it took. I think that is certainly one of the problems, and there was a lesson learned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Director Comey. Secretary Clinton said she never sent or received any classified information over her private email. Was that true?
Our investigation found that there was classified information sent.
So it was not true.
Right. That's what I said.
Okay. Well, I'm looking for a little shorter answer, so you and I are not here quite as long. Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails, either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true. There were a small number of portion markings on, I think, 3 of the documents.
Secretary Clinton said, I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material emailed.
Secretary Clinton said she used just one device. Was that true?
She used multiple devices during the 4 years of her term as Secretary of State.
Secretary Clinton said all work-related emails were returned to the State Department. Was that true?
No, we found work-related emails, thousands, that were not returned.
Secretary Clinton said neither she nor anyone else deleted work-related emails from her personal account. Was that true?
That's a harder one to answer. We found traces of work-related emails on devices or in Slack space, whether they were deleted or whether when a server was changed out, something happened to them. There's no doubt that there were work-related emails that were removed electronically from the email system.
Secretary Clinton said her lawyers read every one of the emails and were overly inclusive. Did her lawyers read the email content individually?
No.
Well, in the interest of time, and because I have a plane to catch tomorrow afternoon, I'm not going to go through any more of the false statements, but I am going to ask you to put on your old hat. False exculpatory statements, they are used for what?
Well, either for a substantive prosecution or for evidence of intent in a criminal prosecution.
Exactly. Intent and consciousness of guilt, right? Is that right?
Right.
Consciousness of guilt and intent. In your old job, you would prove intent, as you just referenced, by showing the jury evidence of a complex scheme that was designed for the very purpose of concealing the public record. And you would be arguing, in addition to concealment, the destruction that you and I just talked about, or certainly the failure to preserve. You would argue all of that under the heading of intent. You would also be arguing the pervasiveness of the scheme, when it started, when it ended, and the number of emails, whether they were originally classified or up-classified. You would argue all of that under the heading of intent. You would also probably, under common scheme or plan, argue the burn bags of daily calendar entries or the missing daily calendar entries as a common scheme or plan to conceal. 2 days ago, Director, you said a reasonable person in her position should have known a private email was no place to send and receive classified information. You're right, an average person does know not to do that. This is no average person. This is a former First Lady, a former United States Senator, and a former Secretary of State that the President now contends is the most competent, qualified person to be President since Jefferson. He didn't say that in 08, but he says it now. She affirmatively rejected efforts to give her a state.gov account. She kept these private emails for almost 2 years and only turned them over to Congress because we found out she had a private email account. So you have a rogue email system set up before she took the oath of office, thousands of what we now know to be classified emails, some of which were classified at the time. One of her more frequent email comrades was in fact hacked, and you don't know whether or not she was. And this scheme took place over a long period of time and resulted in the destruction of public records, and yet you say there is insufficient evidence of intent. You say she was extremely careless, but not intentionally so. You and I both know intent is really difficult to prove. Very rarely do defendants announce, on this date, I intend to break this criminal code section. Just to put everyone on notice, I am going to break the law on this date. It never happens that way. You have to do it with circumstantial evidence. Or if you're Congress and you realize how difficult it is to prove specific intent, you will formulate a statute that allows for gross Negligence. My time is out, but this is really important. You mentioned there's no precedent for criminal prosecution. My fear is there still isn't. There's nothing to keep a future Secretary of State or President from this exact same email scheme or their staff. And my real fear is this. It's what the chairman touched upon. This double-track justice system that is rightly or wrongly perceived in this country. That if you are a private in the Army and you email yourself classified information, you will be kicked out. But if you are Hillary Clinton and you seek a promotion to Commander-in-Chief, you will not be. So what I hope you can do today is help the average person, the reasonable person you made reference to, the reasonable person understand why she appears to be treated differently than the rest of us would be. With that, I would yield back.
We'll now recognize the